The hand connected with her arm, fingers digging into the muscle like 5 sharp points of ice. The grip was not about guidance, it was about ownership. It was a brand, a claim staked in the bright, indifferent chaos of the shopping mall's central atrium. "What did I tell you about making a scene?" Park Ji-hoon's voice was a low hiss, a blade of sound meant only for her, yet the violence in it felt loud enough to crack the polished marble floors. Lee Mina did not flinch. She had learned long ago that flinching was a currency he spent with pleasure. Instead, she focused on the anchor of her world, the small hand clutched tightly in her own. Her son, Leo, all of 4 years old, was staring up at his father, his wide, dark eyes holding a fear too ancient for his small face. He was the reason she was here. He was the reason she had to leave. "Let go of my arm, Ji-hoon," she said. Her voice was quiet, a shocking contrast to the frantic pulse hammering at the base of her throat. It was the voice she used to soothe Leo's nightmares, a voice she had to borrow from a version of herself that wasn't standing here, shaking on the inside. "Let go?" He laughed, a short, ugly bark of a sound. "You walk out of my house. You take my son. You ignore my calls for 3 days, and you think you can tell me to let go?" He tightened his grip, pulling her half a step closer. The expensive fabric of his suit rasped against the sleeve of her simple cotton dress. He smelled of cologne and rage. "We are going home. We are going to have a discussion about your obligations." It was the word obligations that did it, not the pain in her arm. Sorry, not the humiliation of the shoppers flowing around them like a river around 2 jagged rocks. The word landed with the dead weight of all the years she had sacrificed on the altar of his ambition. The late nights she worked, drawing plans he would later sign his name to. The dinners she hosted for his clients, smiling until her face ached. The bruises she covered with concealer. The soul-deep exhaustion of being the silent, uncredited architect of his entire life. "No," she said. The word was small, but it was solid. It was a stone she had been polishing in the dark for months. Leo, feeling the shift in the tension, the finality in his mother's tone, let out a small, frightened whimper. He looked at Mina, his small face a mask of confusion and terror. "Mama," he whispered, the sound barely audible over the mall's tinny pop music. "I want to go home." Ji-hoon's face contorted. He had always hated it when Leo called her that in public, a simple, loving word that somehow underscored his own peripheral role in their son's heart. "He wants to go home, Mina. To his home, with his father." He gave her arm a vicious shake. "Are you going to deny him that? Are you going to traumatize him because you're having some kind of pathetic little rebellion?" The accusation, so masterfully twisted, was a physical blow. She could feel the stares of passers-by, their curiosity curdling into judgment. They saw a well-dressed, handsome man and a woman in a plain dress. They saw a crying child. They drew their own conclusions, swift and merciless. She was making a scene. She was being difficult. She was hurting the child. He was an expert at framing the narrative, at making her the villain in her own story. He had updated the file on public perception. He was working from a version of her that he had carefully crafted for the world. But then, everything changed. The hand on her arm was suddenly gone, not released, removed. A large, warm hand had closed around Ji-hoon's wrist, the grip precise and absolute. There was no struggle, no violent wrenching. It was a simple, declarative statement of fact. Ji-hoon's hold ceased to exist. The atrium did not fall silent. The pop music did not stop, but a pocket of stillness formed around them, a bubble of intense, compressed quiet. The air itself seemed to thicken, to hold its breath. Ji-hoon froze, his face a comical mask of shock and outrage, his arm still held in that implacable grip. What happens next will change everything. The fall of a tyrant, the rise of a queen, and the quiet man who stood between them. You are not going to want to miss a single moment of this. Subscribe to see how this unfolds. Mina followed the line of that grip up a perfectly tailored charcoal suit sleeve over a broad shoulder to a face that was a study in stillness. He was tall, his presence a physical weight in the space. He was not looking at Ji-hoon. His dark, intelligent eyes were on Mina, and in them she saw something she had not seen in a very long time: recognition. He was not looking at a hysterical woman or a problem to be managed. He was looking at her. The man's face was impassive, carved from something more permanent than flesh and bone. His hair was black, cut with a precision that matched the lines of his suit. There was a small faded scar that bisected his left eyebrow, sent the only mar on an otherwise flawless, sternly handsome face. He did not rush. He was not performing. He was simply there, an immovable object that had just met a contemptible force. "I believe," the man said, his voice a low, calm baritone that cut through the noise without any effort at all. "The lady said to let go." Ji-hoon, finally finding his voice, sputtered, yanking his wrist uselessly. "Who the hell are you? This is a private family matter. Get your hands off me before I call security." The man's eyes flickered to Ji-hoon for the first time. It was a brief, dismissive glance, the kind one might give a piece of lint on a fine suit before brushing it away. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of his mouth, a gesture of faint, clinical amusement. "Security," the man repeated softly, as if tasting a foreign word. Then, without raising his voice, he spoke again, a quiet command that carried the weight of structural power. "Mr. Choi." From the periphery, another man in a dark, impeccably tailored suit materialized. He was shorter, wearing glasses, and held a phone in his hand as if it were an extension of his body. He moved with a liquid efficiency, without wasted motion. He was already on the phone, not calling security, becoming it. Two more men, built like brick walls and dressed in the same dark suits, appeared as if summoned from the very shadows of the brightly lit mall. They moved past the gawking shoppers with the eerie silence of predators. They did not look at Mina or the quiet man. Their focus was entirely, professionally, on Ji-hoon. "Sir," Mr. Choi said, his voice polite, professional, and utterly devoid of warmth. "Mr. Kang would like you to leave." Ji-hoon's face cycled through a Rolodex of emotions: confusion, fury, and then a dawning, sickly fear. The name Kang hung in the air, heavy and significant. It was a name that opened doors and closed them, permanently. Ji-hoon was a man who understood power, or at least the performance of it. He recognized he was now in the presence of the real thing, the kind of power that didn't need to shout, the kind of power that owned the building they were standing in, and the bank that held his business loans, and, for all he knew, the very air they were breathing. His arrogant posture collapsed, the swagger drained out of him, leaving behind a hollow man in an expensive suit. His eyes darted from the quiet man, Mr. Kang, to the two mountains of muscle flanking him, and then to Mina. His expression was no longer one of rage, but of pure, distilled panic. Not because he was sorry, because he was caught. The two men each took one of Ji-hoon's arms. Their movements were economical, practiced. Ji-hoon didn't resist. He was escorted away, melting back into the river of shoppers, his departure as swift and silent as the men's arrival. He was a glitch that had been erased from the system. The pocket of silence remained. Kang Dae-hyun, for Mina now knew his name, a name that resonated with the force of a tectonic plate shifting deep beneath the city. Finally released Ji-hoon's wrist, which was no longer there. He flexed his fingers once, then let his hand fall to his side. He turned his full attention back to Mina. "Are you all right?" he asked. His voice was steady as iron wrapped in silk. Mina could only nod. Words felt too large, too clumsy for the moment. The adrenaline was beginning to recede, leaving a profound, trembling exhaustion in its wake. She realized her own hand was still crushing Leo's. She consciously softened her grip. Leo, who had watched the entire exchange with the wide, unblinking stare of a child witnessing something beyond his comprehension, finally spoke. He tugged on her hand. "Mama," he said, his voice small but clear. Is the bad man gone? Dae-hyun's gaze softened as it fell on the boy. For the first time, a genuine emotion flickered in his dark eyes. Something gentle, something protective. Yes, he said, his voice dropping even lower, softer. He's gone. You're safe. Mina looked from her son's small, trusting face to this stranger's powerful, impassive one. Safety. It was a word she had dreamed of. A distant shore she was no longer sure she could reach, and now, here it was, offered to her by a man named Kang in the middle of a shopping mall, a man who moved with the quiet authority of a king in his own court. She did not know who he was, not really. She only knew that when he looked at her, she felt seen. Not as a possession, not as a problem, but as a person, and that, more than anything, was the most disorienting and terrifying and hopeful feeling in the world. The kind of silence that doesn't echo, the kind that settles, that was what he offered. A silence where she could finally hear herself think. Mr. Choi reappeared at Dae-hyun's side, his presence as discreet as a shadow. The matter is handled, sir. Mr. Park has been encouraged to return home. His vehicle has been moved to a less convenient location, and his club memberships are under review. Dae-hyun gave a slight nod, his attention still on Mina and Leo. Good. See to the other thing. Already in motion, sir, Mr. Choi confirmed before melting away once more. The other thing. The words hung there, ominous and reassuring all at once. Mina's mind, sharp and analytical even through the fog of shock, began to race. This was not a random act of chivalry. This was a calculated intervention. The speed, the efficiency, the name Kang. It all pointed to a level of influence she couldn't begin to fathom. Thank you, she said, her voice finding its footing. It came out stronger than she expected. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did, Dae-hyun replied simply. There was no argument, no room for debate. It was a statement of fact. His gaze was intense, analytical, as if he were solving a complex equation. He put his hands on you. In my mall. My mall. The words were delivered without a trace of arrogance. It was just another fact. Like the sky was blue and his suit was charcoal gray. He was a man who dealt in absolutes. Leo, seeming to sense that the immediate danger had passed, grew bolder. He peeked out from behind Mina's leg, his thumb finding its way into his mouth. He looked at the tall, quiet man. Are you a superhero? He asked, his voice muffled. A genuine, startlingly beautiful smile broke through Dae-hyun's stern facade. It was brief, but it transformed his entire face, chasing the shadows from his eyes. Something like that, he said softly. My name is Dae-hyun. What's yours? Leo, the boy mumbled, then hit again. Mina, she supplied automatically, feeling the need to fill the space. My name is Mina. I know, Dae-hyun said. The smile was gone, replaced by that unnerving, steady gaze. Mina, you're an architect, or you were. You designed the preliminary framework for the Helios Tower. Mina felt the world tilt on its axis. The Helios Tower. It was her masterpiece, the project she had poured her soul into for 2 years. It was a symphony of glass and steel, a design so innovative and bold it should have made her career. Instead, Ji-hoon, her project manager and then fiancé, had systematically erased her name from every draft, every presentation, every document, until he was the sole credited genius behind it. He had not updated the file. He was working from a version of her that had never been accurate, even to himself. The theft of that work had been a quiet, soul-crushing violence that preceded all the others. How could you know that? She whispered, her shock overriding her fear. My company acquired the Helios project 6 months ago, Dae-hyun explained, his tone even. The final construction deviated significantly from the initial concept studies. The soul was gone. I've spent the last 4 months trying to find the original designer. The signature on the files was Park Ji-hoon, but the work was not his. His portfolio is loud, This design was quiet. It was brilliant. He had seen her, not just in the mall, but in the lines and curves of a building she thought was lost to her forever. He had recognized her spirit in the ghost of a blueprint. It was a validation so profound, so unexpected, it threatened to bring her to her knees. For years, she had been a ghostwriter for her own life, and this man, this stranger, had just read her signature on the wall. "You are not safe," Dae-hyun stated, his voice pulling her back to the present. "A man like that does not accept defeat. He only escalates." He looked down at Leo, who was now staring at Dae-hyun's polished shoes. "You need a secure place to stay. My car is downstairs." It was not a question. It was not a suggestion. It was the next logical step in a sequence of events he was already controlling. Mina's mind screamed with a lifetime of warnings. Don't trust strangers. Don't be dependent on anyone, especially a powerful man. It was a trap she had just barely escaped. But then she looked at his eyes. They were not hungry, not possessive. They were patient. He was waiting for her to arrive at the same conclusion he already had. He was giving her the illusion of choice, but the reality was she had none. Ji-hoon would be looking for her. He was vindictive and resourceful. Her small apartment, her friends' couches, none of it was safe. "Where would we go?" she asked, the question a fragile thread of defiance. "To my mother's house?" he said, and the answer was so unexpected it disarmed her completely. "She has a fondness for collecting people who need a sanctuary. You will be safe there, and your son will have a garden to play in." His mother. A garden. These were soft, domestic words. They did not belong to the world of quiet commands and men who appeared from shadows. They were a bridge from his world of stark, terrifying power to hers of desperate, fragile hope. She thought about the last 3 days. Hiding in a cheap motel, Leo asking why they couldn't go home, the constant fear of a key turning in the lock. She thought about Ji-hoon's face, the promise of violence in his eyes. She thought about her own reflection in the mirror that morning, a pale, haunted woman she barely recognized. Then she looked at Dae-hyun. He was not a savior. He was something far more dangerous and far more valuable. He was a solution. A quiet sovereign offering a piece of his fortified kingdom. Taking a deep breath, Mina made a decision. She had been running from a monster. Perhaps it was time to run towards one. "Okay," she said. "If you have ever felt unseen, if you have ever had your strength mistaken for weakness, drop a heart in the comments for Mina. She deserved to be found. And if you think this is the end of Ji-hoon, you are mistaken. Hit that like button right now if you are ready to see what a man with nothing to lose will do next, and what a man with everything to protect is capable of." The journey to the car was a surreal bubble of calm. Dae-hyun walked beside her, his presence a silent shield against the curious stares that followed them. He did not touch her, but she felt enveloped by his protection all the same. Leo, seemingly exhausted by the emotional roller coaster, had allowed Dae-hyun to lift him into his arms. The boy's head rested trustingly on the formidable stranger's shoulder, his small body finally relaxed. It was a sight so jarringly tender it made Mina's heart ache. They descended in a private glass elevator, bypassing the public parking garage. It slid open to reveal a subterranean level that was less a garage and more a showroom. Sleek, dark cars sat parked in perfectly spaced bays under soft, gallery-style lighting. Mr. Choi was waiting for them beside a black sedan that looked more like a polished piece of obsidian than a vehicle. He opened the rear door without a word. "My driver will take you," Dae-hyun said, his voice a low rumble as he carefully settled Leo onto the plush leather seat. The boy was already half asleep. "I have some business to conclude here." Mina hesitated at the door of the car. Her entire life had just been upended and reordered by this man in the span of 15 minutes. She was about to get into a car with a stranger to be taken to an unknown location, all on his word. The ingrained survival instincts screamed in protest. He seemed to read the conflict on her face. "The estate is in the hills outside the city. It's called Yoon's Garden. My mother is Chairman Kang. She is expecting you. He paused, his gaze holding hers. "You have my word, Lee Mina. You and your son will be safe there." His word. In his world, she was beginning to understand, that was a contract sealed in blood and steel. She looked past him at Leo, now curled up on the seat, a picture of untroubled sleep. That was all the assurance she needed. She slid into the car. The interior was silent, insulated from the world. The door closed with a soft, final thud. Through the tinted window, she watched Dae-hyun speak briefly to Mr. Choi. He gestured, his hands moving with quiet, sharp precision. He was giving orders. He was rearranging the world to his liking. Then, he looked back at the car, at her, and gave a single small nod before turning and walking back towards the elevator, his form disappearing into the sleek, silent machinery of his own power. The drive was long and quiet. The city's dense concrete jungle gave way to winding roads that climbed into lush green hills. The air grew cooler, cleaner. Mina watched the landscape pass by, her mind a whirlwind. She thought about Ji-hoon. She thought about the stolen blueprints. She thought about the impossible coincidence, or was it fate, that had led Kang Dae-hyun to her. They arrived at a set of immense, imposing gates forged from dark iron in the shape of intertwined ginkgo leaves. A discreet camera watched them, and the gates swung open without a sound. The car proceeded up a long gravel driveway lined with ancient pine trees. It was like entering another world, a secluded kingdom hidden from the noise and grime of the city. The house was not a modern fortress of glass and steel as she might have expected. It was a sprawling, traditional-style estate, a series of connected pavilions with elegant tiled roofs and warm wooden beams, all built around a central courtyard. It was a house that had stood for generations, a place of deep, quiet, structural power. The car stopped, and the driver opened her door. An old woman was waiting for them on the veranda. She was small and slender, dressed in a simple but exquisitely made handbag of pale gray silk. Her hair was a neat silver coronet, and her face was a beautiful map of wrinkles, her eyes bright and sharp with intelligence. This was Chairman Kang. She held no visible markers of power, no bodyguards, on no assistants, but her presence commanded the space entirely. "You must be Mina Si," the old woman said, her voice warm and melodic. She smiled, and the gesture was so genuinely welcoming, it eased a knot of tension in Mina's chest she hadn't even realized was there. "And this must be Leo. My son called. He said you were having a complicated day." Complicated. It was an extraordinary understatement, yet it felt exactly right. "Chairman Kang," Mina began, bowing deeply. "I am so sorry for the imposition. I don't know what your son told you, but—" The old woman waved a dismissive hand, her movements full of a delicate, bird-like grace. "He told me a brilliant woman and her brave son needed a quiet place to rest. That is all I need to know." She looked into the car at the sleeping Leo. "Let the boy sleep. Come, have some tea." "The world can wait until you have had some tea." Mina followed her into the house. The interior was a masterpiece of serene, minimalist design. Polished dark wood floors, rice paper screens, and strategically placed pieces of art. The air smelled of sandalwood and green tea. It was the kind of silence that doesn't echo, the kind that settles, seeping into your bones. They sat in a room that overlooked a breathtaking garden. A pond filled with koi carp shimmered under the afternoon sun, and ancient gnarled trees framed a view of the distant city skyline. Chairman Kang poured tea into small, delicate cups. "My son can be abrupt," she said, her eyes twinkling with amusement. "He sees a problem, he solves it. He does not always consider the emotional disruption it causes for others." "He saved us," Mina said simply. I don't know how to thank him." "By being safe," the chairman replied, her expression turning serious. "By allowing yourself the space to breathe. That is the only thanks he needs." She took a sip of her tea, studying Mina over the rim of the cup. "Dae-hyun told me about your work. The original designs for the Helios Tower. He has them, you know. He acquired the architectural firm's private archives a month ago, looking for you." Mina's hand trembled, rattling the cup in its saucer. He hadn't just stumbled upon the plans, he had hunted them down. He had been looking for her. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. For so long, her greatest talent had been a source of pain and exploitation. Now it was the reason she had been found. "He believes," Chairman Kang continued, her voice soft, "that talent like yours is a resource to be protected. That beauty should not be locked in a drawer and signed by a lesser man." She set her cup down. "He has a strong sense of justice, my son. It is his greatest strength and his most profound burden." Later that day, Mina was shown to a suite of rooms in a private wing of the estate. It was larger than her entire apartment. It had its own small kitchen, a living area with a low table, and a bedroom with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out onto a secluded part of the garden. A small, child-sized bed had already been set up next to the main one for Leo. Every detail had been anticipated. Leo woke up slowly, disoriented. He sat up, rubbing his eyes and looking around the unfamiliar room. "Mama? Where are we?" Mina sat on the edge of his bed, stroking his hair. "We're at a friend's house," she said. "It's a safe place." He seemed to accept this. He scrambled off the bed and ran to the window, his small hands pressing against the glass. "Wow," he breathed, looking at the garden. "Can I go play?" For the first time in a very long time, Mina could say yes without a flicker of fear. "Yes, baby, you can go play." The next few days passed in a dreamlike haze of peace. Mina and Leo explored the vast garden. They ate simple, delicious meals with Chairman Kang, who told them stories about the estate and listened with rapt attention as Leo chattered about his day. The chairman, Mina learned, was the retired head of the Kang corporate empire, a legend in the business world who had handed the reins to her son 5 years prior. Her power was different from his, softer, more deeply rooted, but no less absolute. She saw Mina's exhaustion, her quiet resilience, and treated her not as a guest, but as a cherished family member who had finally come home. Dae-hyun did not appear, but his presence was a constant, invisible hum beneath the surface of their new life. Fresh clothes appeared in their closets, in exactly their sizes. A set of the finest quality architectural drafting tools and supplies was delivered and left on the table in her living area, with no note. One evening, a tablet was delivered by a silent housekeeper. On it was a single file, a secure, encrypted link to a portfolio. Her portfolio. It contained high-resolution scans of all her original work, including the Helios Tower concept studies, all meticulously cataloged and watermarked with her name, Lee Mina. He was giving her back the pieces of herself that had been stolen. She began to draw again. At first, her hands felt stiff, her mind blank. The creative spark she thought had been extinguished forever was buried under layers of fear and grief. But in the quiet of Yoon's garden, surrounded by beauty and safety, it began to flicker back to life. She sketched the gnarled trunk of a pine tree, the precise architecture of a lotus flower, the way the light fell across the tiled roofs at dawn. She was drawing one afternoon in the garden, Leo chasing dragonflies near the pond, when she heard footsteps on the gravel path. It was Dae-hyun. He was dressed less formally today, in dark trousers and a soft black cashmere sweater. He moved with the same unhurried grace, his stillness a stark contrast to the life teeming around him. He stopped a few feet away, not wanting to startle her. He simply watched her for a moment, his eyes on the sketch pad in her lap. "I hoped you would find them useful," he said, his voice the same low baritone she remembered. Mina looked up, her heart giving a small, sharp lurch. In this peaceful setting, away from the violence and chaos of the mall, his power felt less like a weapon and more like a shield. "Thank you," she said, "for everything. The supplies, the portfolio. You didn't have to." "I did," he repeated, the same words as before. He came closer and looked down at her drawing. It was a detailed study of the main house's complex roof structure. "You have an eye for foundations, for the things that hold everything else up. It felt like he was talking about more than just architecture. "Is it over?" she asked, the question she had been holding in for days. "With Ji-hoon?" Dae-hyun's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "No," he said, "it's just beginning." He looked away from her, his gaze fixed on the distant city. "He has filed a motion for sole custody of Leo, citing parental abduction and emotional instability. He has also filed a civil suit against you for breach of contract, claiming you stole proprietary designs from his firm." The blood drained from Mina's face. The sheer audacity, the cruelty of it was breathtaking. He was using the very work he stole from her as a weapon against her. He was trying to take her son. "He can't," she whispered, horrified. "He can't do that." "He can try," Dae-hyun said, his voice cold as stone. "He is a cornered animal, and he is lashing out with the only weapons he has. Lies and manipulation." He looked back at her, his dark eyes boring into hers. "He has made a fatal miscalculation. He believes this is a fight against you. He does not yet understand that he has declared war on me." He had not updated the file. He was working from a version of the world that was no longer accurate. "What are you going to do?" Mina asked, her voice trembling. "I am going to let him build his own gallows," Dae-hyun said, a flicker of something cold and dangerous in his eyes. "And then I will provide the rope." He looked over at Leo, who had tired of chasing dragonflies and was now trying to talk to a large koi fish at the edge of the pond. A hint of warmth returned to his face. "Do not worry about this, Mina. Focus on your work. Focus on your son. I will handle it." He turned to leave, but Mina's voice stopped him. "I don't leave because things become complicated, Dae-hyun-si." The words were out before she could stop them. It was important that he knew. She was not a damsel to be rescued and sheltered. She was a partner in this, whether he saw it that way or not. "I am not fragile." He turned back, a look of surprise and then deep respect on his face. He studied her for a long moment, seeing the steel beneath her quiet grace. "I know," he said finally. "That is why I am doing this." In the weeks that followed, Mina threw herself into her work with a ferocity she hadn't felt in years. The safety of Yoon's garden was a crucible, burning away her fear and doubt, leaving only the pure, hard core of her talent. She filled sketchbooks with new ideas, designs for buildings that were bold and lyrical, structures that seemed to breathe with a life of their own. She and Dae-hyun fell into a quiet rhythm. He would appear at the estate in the evenings, his suit a dark slash against the garden's vibrant colors. They would share dinner with his mother, the three of them forming an unlikely but comfortable tableau. Afterward, while Leo slept soundly, they would walk in the garden, the air cool and fragrant with night-blooming jasmine. They rarely spoke of Ji-hoon. Instead, he would ask about her designs. He would listen, his head tilted slightly, as she explained the principles of structural integrity, or the poetic potential of cantilevered glass. He understood. He saw the complex mathematics and the artistry, the pragmatism and the soul. He saw all of her. In return, he offered her glimpses into his world. He spoke of corporate strategy as if it were a chess game played across continents. He described the intricate dance of logistics, the subtle art of a hostile takeover. He never spoke of the darker aspects of his business, the source of the name Kang that made men like Ji-hoon tremble. But she could feel it there, a silent, powerful undertow beneath the calm surface of his words. One evening, they were standing by the koi pond, the moon a silver disk in the black water. "He seems warm," Dae-hyun said, watching a golden koi swim lazy circles. Mina knew he wasn't talking about the fish. He was talking about Leo. "He is," she said, smiling. "He has a good heart. He gets that from you," Dae-hyun stated, looking at her. The moonlight caught the silver of the scar in his eyebrow. "He is also already annoyed. He gets that from you, too." Mina laughed, a real, unburdened sound. It felt foreign and wonderful. "He is not annoyed. He is discerning." My mistake, Dae-hyun said, his lips twitching in that rare, breathtaking smile. The quiet intimacy of the moment was more potent than any declaration. It was a connection being forged in shared silence, in mutual respect. It was the slow, respectful development of a relationship based on recognition and safety rather than fleeting passion. This was not a fire. It was the slow, immense pressure that creates a diamond. Meanwhile, Ji-hoon was becoming increasingly frantic. His lawsuits were going nowhere, snarled in a web of procedural delays spun by a team of lawyers so expensive and powerful they were practically mythical. His attempts to serve Mina with papers were met by the impenetrable gates of Yoon's garden. His business began to suffer. A major investor pulled out unexpectedly. A lucrative city contract was abruptly canceled due to a newly discovered zoning irregularity. His credit lines were frozen. He was being dismantled piece by piece with the quiet, surgical precision of a master strategist. But in his vanity and arrogance, he couldn't see the larger pattern. He saw only a string of bad luck, a series of betrayals by a world that failed to recognize his greatness. He saw Mina's defiance as the root cause of it all. He was convinced that if he could just get to her, just talk to her, just force her to see reason, he could regain control. He had not updated the file. He was working from a version of her that had never been accurate, a version that was now hopelessly, laughably out of date. His final fatal miscalculation came in the form of an invitation. The Obsidian Gala, the premier philanthropic event of the year, hosted by the Kang Corporation. An invitation arrived at Ji-hoon's rapidly emptying office. It was a clerical error, he assumed, a ghost in the mailing list. Or perhaps a sign that the tide was turning, that the world was finally coming to its senses. He saw it as an opportunity, a public forum, a place where he could confront Mina away from her new protector's walls. He imagined the scene. He, righteous and wronged, she, shamed into submission. He would be magnanimous in his victory. He would offer to take her back, to fix the mess she had made. He rented a tuxedo, spending the last of his accessible cash. He shined his shoes. He practiced his speech in the mirror. He was a man walking confidently, arrogantly, into a trap that had been set for him weeks ago. The night of the gala was a spectacle of wealth and power. The city's elite floated through the grand ballroom of the Helios Tower, her tower, draped in jewels and couture. The air hummed with influence. Mina stood on a balcony overlooking the event, a glass of champagne untouched in her hand. She wore an emerald green gown, a color Dae-hyun had chosen. It was a simple, architecturally precise dress that clung to her form, its clean lines a statement of quiet confidence. She felt like she was wearing armor. Dae-hyun stood beside her, a commanding presence in a perfectly tailored black tuxedo. He had been a low hum of protective energy all night, his hand occasionally brushing the small of her back. Oh, a silent reassurance. "Are you ready?" he asked softly. "No," she answered honestly. "But I will be." He nodded, accepting her answer. "Mr. Choi is monitoring his arrival. He will be allowed in. He will be given the stage he so desperately craves." Just then, a commotion near the grand entrance drew their attention. Park Ji-hoon had arrived. He pushed his way through the crowd with a frantic, wild-eyed energy that was jarringly out of place in the room's atmosphere of curated calm. His tuxedo was slightly rumpled, his hair disheveled. He looked less like a guest and more like a man who had just run a marathon. He scanned the room, his eyes searching, until they landed on Mina. A triumphant, ugly smirk spread across his face. He started towards the balcony, shouldering people aside. "Mina!" he shouted, his voice raw and loud, shattering the ballroom's elegant murmur. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. All eyes turned towards him. He had his stage. He stormed up the few steps to the balcony, his face flushed with a desperate, manic energy. "Mina, this has gone on long enough. Stop this foolishness. We are going home. You have an obligation to me, to our family." He reached for her arm, the same gesture of ownership he had used in the mall. Before his fingers could touch her, Dae-hyun moved. He didn't lunge or shout. He simply shifted his body, placing himself between Mina and Ji-hoon. It was a small, quiet movement, but it reordered the entire scene. "Sit down, Ji-hoon," Dae-hyun said. His voice was not loud, but it carried across the suddenly silent ballroom. It was not a request. Ji-hoon faltered, his momentum broken by the wall of quiet authority that was Kang Dae-hyun. "You," he snarled, pointing a trembling finger. "You're behind this. You've poisoned her against me. She is my wife. She belongs with me." Mina stepped out from behind Dae-hyun. Her fear was gone, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. "I was never your wife, Ji-hoon," she said, her voice clear and steady, amplified by the room's stunned silence. "I was your employee, your ghostwriter, your stepping stone, and you are not Leo's father. You are merely his biological progenitor. You have never earned the title of father." Ji-hoon stared at her, dumbfounded. This was not the timid, pliable woman he knew. He was working from a version of her that had been deleted. "She has obligations," he insisted, turning his appeal to the watching crowd, to the jury of his former peers. "Contracts were signed. She owes me." "Let's talk about what is owed," Dae-hyun said, his voice dropping to a conversational, almost gentle tone. The contrast with the tension in the room was terrifying. He pulled his phone from his pocket, the screen glowing in the dim light. "As of 3 hours ago, my corporation completed its acquisition of the final 48% of shares in Park Consolidated, the construction firm your father left you. As the new majority shareholder, my first act was to call an emergency board meeting. My second was to review the company's finances." He swiped his thumb across the screen. "It appears there has been a great deal of creative accounting, funds embezzled for personal use, bribes paid for city contracts which, I might add, have since been revoked." Ji-hoon's face went white. The blood drained from it, leaving a pasty gray mask of horror. "Your firm," Dae-hyun continued in that same, horribly calm voice, "is now facing a federal audit. Your personal accounts, which were leveraged against the company's assets, have been frozen pending the investigation. The apartment you live in, which was a corporate asset, has been liquidated. The car you drove here tonight was repossessed from the valet an hour ago." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. It was a public execution, carried out with the cold precision of a surgeon. "You came here tonight believing you had a claim on this woman," Dae-hyun said, his eyes like chips of obsidian. "But the truth is, Park Ji-hoon, you no longer own anything. Not your company, not your home. Not even the suit on your back, which, I see from the rental agreement I also acquired, is due back by midnight." A collective gasp went through the ballroom. This was not just ruin. This was annihilation. Dae-hyun put his phone away. "You spoke of obligation. You have one. To the authorities who are waiting for you downstairs." Ji-hoon stared at him, his mouth opening and closing silently. His mind, so full of arrogance and delusion, was struggling to process the sheer, absolute totality of his defeat. The world he had built on lies and theft had been unraveled and dismantled in a matter of weeks, culminating in this single, perfect moment of public humiliation. His composure finally, irrevocably, shattered. A low, wretched sound tore from his throat, the sound of a man's soul breaking. His knees buckled. Park Ji-hoon, the arrogant tyrant, dropped to the floor of the Helios Tower, the monument to his stolen glory, and began to sob. Not quiet, dignified tears, but loud, ugly, gasping sobs of pure, selfish despair. The 2 silent, suited men from the mall appeared at his side. They lifted him to his feet as if he were a sack of grain. He did not resist. He was a hollow shell, all the performative confidence gone, leaving only the pathetic, whimpering creature that had been there all along. They dragged him away, his sobs echoing through the grand ballroom until he was gone. A heavy silence remained. Dae-hyun turned to the powerful, stunned audience. His expression was once again impassive, but his eyes, when he looked at Mina, were full of a fierce, protective light. "My apologies for the interruption," he said, his voice resonating with calm authority. Now, if I may, I would like to make an introduction. He gently took Mina's hand, his touch warm and steady. He led her to the front of the balcony, to the very spot where Ji-hoon had collapsed. He held her hand up for all to see. Many of you have complimented the beauty of this building tonight, he said, his voice ringing with pride. You have admired its grace, its strength, its innovation. For too long, the credit for that vision has been misplaced. He looked at Mina, his voice softening. I would like to introduce you to the true architect of the Helios Tower, the most capable person in every room she has ever been in, the woman whose genius is the foundation we are all standing on tonight, Miss Lee Mina. He then did something that shocked the room more than Ji-hoon's breakdown. He bowed, a deep, one formal gesture of profound respect to her. A single person began to clap, then another and another. Within seconds, the entire ballroom, filled with the most powerful people in the country, erupted in a thunderous, standing ovation. It was not for him. It was for her. Mina stood in the warm, bright light, her hand in Dae-hyun's, the sound of applause washing over her. The weight of years of silence, of being unseen and undervalued, lifted from her shoulders. It was a slow exhale she had been holding for a decade. A real smile reached her eyes, a smile so bright it felt like the dawn. It was the cathartic satisfaction of seeing an antagonist face consequences, yes, but it was more than that. It was the profound, earth-shattering relief of being seen correctly. Later, they stood on that same balcony. On the party, a distant murmur behind them. The city sprawled out below, a tapestry of glittering lights. Are you all right? Dae-hyun asked, his hand still holding hers. I am, she said, and she meant it. She felt placed, correctly placed. Thank you. I told you, Mina, he said, his thumb stroking the back of her hand. Talent like yours is a resource to be protected. And what about you? She asked, turning to face him. Who protects you? He looked at her, and in his dark, guarded eyes she saw a flicker of vulnerability, a longing he had likely never allowed himself to acknowledge. The position has been vacant for some time, he said, his voice a low whisper. She squeezed his hand. Perhaps you'll consider my application, she said softly. A slow, genuine smile spread across his face. It was a promise, a beginning. They were not a fairy tale. They were two complicated people who had found each other in the wreckage. He, a quiet sovereign who commanded empires. She, an underestimated survivor who built them. Together they looked out at the city, at the future they would now build together. A future built not on obligation, but on honesty, on respect, and on the daily, deliberate choice to stay. Some people will take your silence for weakness and your grace for compliance. They will build their hollow kingdoms on your quiet competence and call it their own. But strength is not always loud. Sometimes it is the quiet, unbreakable will to endure. Sometimes it is the courage to draw a line. And sometimes it is the silent, watchful protector who sees the queen you have always been and simply waits for the world to catch up. What part of Mina's journey resonated with you the most? Drop a comment below and tell us what you think the first thing she should design for the Kang Corporation will be. If this story of resilience and vindication moved you, please hit that like button right now. Your support helps us bring more stories like this to life. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now is the perfect time. Hit that button so you never miss what comes next. A new war is brewing on the horizon, as old enemies of the Kang family see a new heart in their leader and mistake it for a weakness. The House of the Dragon arc is coming, and trust me, you are not prepared.